The human fleet emerged at the edge of the galaxy into something that should not have existed. Space itself looked broken. The stars ahead, which should have burned with steady light, flickered like dying flames. Some vanished completely, disappearing from existence one by one as if the universe was erasing them. Captain Daewon Park stared at the viewscreen in disbelief as an entire star blinked out. Not exploded, not collapsed, just gone. "That can't be possible," an officer whispered. The sensor displays across the bridge filled with impossible readings. They detected matter where there should have been empty space, energy signatures that defied every known law of physics, and gravitational patterns that made no sense. Reality itself seemed to be changing. Admiral Gi-won Kim established command aboard the heavy cruiser Dauntless, her flagship positioned at the center of the human formation. From there, she coordinated the fleet while scientists and tactical teams desperately tried to understand what they were facing. "This isn't a battlefield," Admiral Kim said, studying the data. "It's something else." Commander Taeyang Lee took the first step into the unknown. Leading a squadron of reconnaissance fighters, she flew dangerously close to the affected zones, gathering every piece of information they could obtain. What they discovered was far worse than any enemy weapon. The swarm was not destroying star systems. It was transforming them. Entire planets had been dismantled at the molecular level, their oceans, mountains, and continents taken apart and rebuilt into colossal structures beyond human understanding. The worlds were technically still there, but they were no longer planets. They had become something new, something artificial, something alive. Each transformed world had been connected into a vast network, a piece of a greater machine that stretched across the stars. The swarm was not invading the galaxy. It was rebuilding it, and humanity had just discovered that they were not fighting an enemy that wanted to conquer the universe. They were fighting one that wanted to replace it. Dr. Huan Choi worked around the clock analyzing the swarm's patterns. What she learned challenged everything she thought she knew. The swarm was not a single intelligence directing an army. It was more like an ecosystem, a collection of different types of creatures working together. There were harvesters that broke down matter, architects that rebuilt it into new forms, and shepherds that guided the whole process. Most disturbing were what she called the echoes. These were swarm constructs that seemed to be built from the biological patterns of species the swarm had consumed. Huan identified fragments of dozens of extinct civilizations in their design. The swarm had been doing this for billions of years, and each time it learned from its prey. Every species it consumed made it smarter and more dangerous. She also discovered something the Council had missed. The swarm did communicate, but on timescales that made no sense to short-lived organic beings. It sent messages through quantum fields and gravitational waves, conversations that took decades or centuries to complete. To the swarm, the rapid rise of civilizations like humanity was like watching bacteria multiply under a microscope. Fascinating, perhaps, but ultimately unimportant. The swarm was not hostile in any emotional sense. It was indifferent, and somehow that was worse than hatred. You could reason with an enemy that hated you, but how did you reason with something that saw you as raw materials? Contact came suddenly on the fleet's 5th day at the rim. A harvester construct appeared from jump space massive as Earth's moon. It did not attack immediately. Instead, it scanned the human ships with beams of light that felt wrong somehow, as if they were looking at more than just physical structure. Then, it began moving toward the nearest system that still had organic life. Admiral Kim made the decision everyone knew was coming. All ships weapons free. Target the harvester. Fire at will. This was humanity's first real combat in 300 years. What followed would be studied in military memes for generations. The Council's intelligence had been right about one thing. Their weapons would be useless against the swarm. Council ships used particle beams and gravitic disruptors designed for surgical precision. These weapons were meant to disable, not destroy. But human weapons were different. Humans had built their weapons on a death world where everything was a threat. They believed in overwhelming force and redundant systems. Captain Park's destroyer group launched kinetic kill vehicles. Simple chunks of metal accelerated to 30% of light speed. They fired nuclear-ped lasers that had not been used in combat in centuries. They shot railgun slugs that were technically obsolete, but devastatingly effective. The Harvester's shielding could deflect energy weapons. It could absorb radiation. It could even manipulate local gravity to redirect most attacks. But it had no defense against simple mass traveling at relativistic speeds. When a chunk of metal hit it at a third of light speed, the impact released energy equivalent to a nuclear bomb. The battle lasted only 17 minutes. The Harvester was destroyed, breaking apart into clouds of debris that glowed with residual heat. But victory came with a cost. The destroyer's sharp blade was lost when the Harvester's death throes caused a chain reaction in its reactor. 147 crew members died in an instant, vaporized before they even knew what happened. Commander Lee, analyzing the engagement afterward, noticed something chilling. "It was testing us," she said. "That entire fight was a diagnostic scan. The Harvester was gathering data about our capabilities." She was right. Before it died, the Harvester transmitted a burst of compressed data back toward the main swarm. Humanity had announced itself. More importantly, they had demonstrated that they were dangerous in ways the swarm had not encountered in this galaxy before. The fleet held a memorial service for the crew of the Sharp Blade. It was broadcast back to Earth, watched by billions. Admiral Kim spoke the traditional words, but her voice was heavy with the knowledge that these would not be the last deaths. This was just the beginning. Dr. Huan Choi watched the service with tears in her eyes. She had never witnessed death like this before. She had grown up in a peaceful era where people died of old age or accidents, not in combat. Now she was seeing the reality of warfare, and it shook her deeply. She confronted Admiral Kim after the service. "Do we have the right to do this?" she asked. "To engage in warfare without exhausting every diplomatic option? We have not even tried to communicate with the swarm." Admiral Kim's response was gentle but firm. "Doctor, I have read your analysis. The swarm operates on geological timescales. By the time they are ready to have a conversation, our great-great-grandchildren will be dead. We fight now, or we do not fight at all." Over the next few days, the fleet detected massive movements in the swarm. The indifferent harvesting had stopped. Resources were being redirected. Constructs were being reorganized. Something had changed in the swarm's behavior. Most ominously, new signatures appeared on sensors unlike anything in the Council's databases. Commander Lee identified them from their movement patterns. They were predators. The swarm had encountered resistance before, rare as it was, and it had developed an immune response. Somewhere in its vast biological memory, stored in the patterns of extinct civilizations, it remembered how to make war. The predator constructs were different from harvesters. They moved with purpose and aggression. They positioned themselves in tactical formations. They did not simply scan and categorize. They hunted. Captain Park called an emergency meeting with his senior officers. "The swarm is adapting." He said, "It is bringing weapons against us. Real weapons, not just harvesting tools. We need to be ready for a very different kind of fight." Admiral Kim addressed the entire fleet. "All ships be advised. New swarm forces are approaching our position. These are combat constructs built to destroy resistance. This will not be like the Harvester. This will be war. All crew prepare for battle." The fleet went to full combat readiness. Weapon systems were charged. Shields were powered to maximum. Damage control teams stood ready. Every crew member knew their role, had practiced it countless times. Now they would see if their training was enough. The Predator constructs arrived in a wave, emerging from jump space in perfect coordination. There were dozens of them, each unique, each built from the tactical knowledge of some extinct species. Some phased through normal space. Others generated localized gravity wells to crush opponents. A few released swarms of smaller units that moved like metallic insects burrowing into ship holes. The battle began, and it was brutal. 3 destroyers were destroyed in the opening minutes. The heavy cruiser, Valiant Dawn, took catastrophic damage and had to withdraw. Human weapons were effective, but the Predators adapted in real time, learning from each engagement and sharing that knowledge across their network. This was not like fighting the Harvester. This was fighting an enemy that learned as fast as humans did, that adapted its tactics moment by moment, that shared every lesson across its entire force. For the first time since arriving at the Rim, the human fleet faced the possibility of defeat. Admiral Kim watched the battle unfold from her command center. She had fought many engagements in her long career, but never against an enemy like this. The swarm was not just powerful, it was smart, patient, and willing to sacrifice individual units to learn how to defeat the whole fleet. The human fleet had proven they could fight. Now they would discover if they could survive. The council ships arrived at Neptune 3 days after the fleet awakened. Minister Wan Su-shin led them, a diplomat who had spent his entire career promoting peace. He had always believed that humanity's integration into the council was the greatest achievement of his life. Now he stood on the bridge of a council cruiser, staring at the human warships with something close to horror. The human ships looked wrong compared to council vessels. Council ships were sleek and elegant, built for efficiency and beauty. Human ships were brutal blocks of armor and weapons. They had thick hulls designed to take punishment. They had backup systems for their backup systems. They looked like they were built by people who expected to get hit and wanted to make sure they could hit back. Minister Shin opened communications with Captain Dewan Park. His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Captain, you are in violation of 23 different council regulations. You have activated military vessels without authorization. You have assembled an armed fleet in council space. I am here to inform you that if you do not power down immediately, humanity will be expelled from the council and face severe sanctions." Dewan looked at the minister's face on the screen. He saw fear there beneath the diplomatic language. "Minister, have you looked at the sensor data from the Galactic Rim? Have you seen what is happening to the outer systems?" The minister's expression flickered. "That is classified council business. It does not concern you. It concerns all of us." Day One said quietly, "The swarm is here, and you know it." Before the minister could respond, a new ship appeared on sensors. It was a small civilian transport, but everyone recognized it. Admiral Gi-won Kim had arrived. At 67, she was a legend among human military officers. She had fought in the last wars before peace, and her tactical genius was still studied in secret by the keepers. Now she was here, and her presence changed everything. The admiral docked with the council flagship and requested a meeting. Minister Shin could not refuse without causing a diplomatic incident. Within an hour, they were seated in a conference room with Dr. Hwan Choi and several high-ranking council officials. Admiral Kim spoke first. She was a small woman with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Show us your defense plans," she said simply. "Show us how the council intends to stop the swarm, and we will stand down our fleet." The council officials exchanged looks. Finally, one of them activated a holographic display. What appeared made Hwan's heart sink. The council had no defense plans. Instead, they had evacuation plans. Massive generation ships hidden in deep space, ready to flee the galaxy entirely. They were not preparing to fight. They were preparing to run. "This is your strategy?" Admiral Kim asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Abandon the galaxy. We have no choice." One of the council military advisors said, "The swarm cannot be fought. Every species that has tried has been consumed. Our only hope is to flee and hope it does not follow us into the void between galaxies." "You have not tried to fight it," Commander Taeyang Lee said. She had joined the meeting standing near the back. She was only 29, but she spoke with the confidence of someone who had studied warfare her entire life. "You have no weapons. Your ships are not built for combat. You are not prepared because you chose not to prepare." "We chose peace," Minister Shin said firmly. "We chose to evolve beyond primitive violence." "You chose to be helpless," Dwan said from his position near Admiral Kim. "And now you expect us to be helpless with you." Admiral Kim raised her hand for silence. "I have a proposal. Give us 6 months. Let humanity take our fleet to the Galactic Rim and engage the swarm. If we fail, you can proceed with your evacuation. If we succeed, even partially, we buy time to develop better defenses or find the swarm's weaknesses." The council officials argued for hours. The idea of deliberately fighting the swarm violated everything they believed. But they were also desperate. Their timeline showed the swarm would reach the core worlds in 6 months anyway. Finally, they agreed to a compromise. Humanity could deploy their fleet, but only as a reconnaissance force. No offensive operations without council approval. Admiral Kim accepted, though everyone in the room knew what that meant. By the time orders reached the rim, any battle would be long over. She had essentially been given permission to do whatever she thought necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, the human fleet prepared for deployment. Veterans emerged from retirement across the solar system. They were not young anymore. Most were in their 40s, 50s, or even 60s, but they remembered their training. They remembered what it meant to serve on a warship. Commander Lee assembled her fighter squadrons. These were not modern pilots who relied on AI assistance for everything. These were veterans who had learned to fly manually, who could calculate firing solutions in their heads, who trusted their instincts more than their computers. They were old-fashioned, but that might be exactly what was needed. Dr. Hwan Choi volunteered to join the fleet as a communication specialist. She wanted to document everything that happened. Part of her still hoped there might be a way to communicate with the swarm, to find a peaceful solution, but mostly, she wanted to understand. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes. Captain Duan Park took command of the destroyer Indomitable Spirit. It was not the largest ship in the fleet, but it was fast and well-armed. His crew was hand-picked, veterans who had served with him before. They knew each other's rhythms, understood each other's signals. In combat, that trust could mean the difference between life and death. The night before departure, Daewon recorded a message to be sent back to Earth. He knew this might be the last time anyone heard from them. He chose his words carefully. To the people of Earth, he began, "We are the children of a death world. We evolved on a planet where the weather tried to kill us, where predators hunted us, where even the plants were dangerous. We learned to survive through strength, through cleverness, and through the willingness to fight when fighting was necessary." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The galaxy tried to make us soft. They told us that violence was wrong, that warfare was primitive. They convinced us to put away our weapons and forget what we were. But we remember. We remember because some threats cannot be negotiated with. Some dangers cannot be reasoned away. Today we go to face the swarm. We go to remind the darkness that humans are not prey. We are predators when we need to be. We are warriors when we must be. And we will fight for our home, for our species, and for a galaxy that forgot how to defend itself. If we do not return, remember us as we were people who chose to stand and fight when running seemed easier. Remember that peace is only possible when good people are willing to do violence to protect it. And remember that the children of Earth never surrendered, not to any threat, not even to one that has consumed galaxies. He ended the recording and sent it to Earth. Then he went to the bridge of his ship and gave the order to prepare for jump. The fleet assembled in formation. 12 heavy cruisers, 48 destroyers, and hundreds of fighter craft. At the center was the Soul's Thunder, the massive dreadnought that would serve as Admiral Kim's flagship. The ships were old, by council standards, relics of a more violent age, but they were ready. Admiral Kim opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim. Today we jump to the galactic rim. We go to face an enemy that the council says cannot be defeated. We go to prove them wrong. We go to show the galaxy what humans do when someone threatens our home. All ships prepare for jump." The fleet jumped as one, disappearing from Neptune space in a flash of light. They left behind a galaxy holding its breath, hoping that the Deathworld's children could succeed where ancient civilizations had failed. Across human space, people watched the departure on their screens. Some felt pride, some felt fear, but all of them felt something that had been missing for 3 centuries. The knowledge that their species could still fight when necessary, that they were not helpless, that they remembered what it meant to be warriors. The swarm was coming, and humanity was going to meet it head-on, but it was also humanity's best chance to turn the tide of this war. Admiral Jiwon Kim divided her forces carefully. The majority of the fleet would remain at the galactic rim, conducting diversionary attacks to keep the swarm's attention focused away from the true target. Only 12 ships would attempt the deep penetration into swarm territory. It was a small force for such a dangerous mission, but speed and stealth were more important than numbers. Captain Daewon Park would lead the strike force in his destroyer Indomitable Spirit. The damaged dreadnought Soul's Thunder would join them once repairs were complete, serving as the heavy assault element. The rest of the force consisted of fast destroyers and Commander Taeyang Li's fighter squadrons. They would be traveling light and fast into the most dangerous region of space ever explored. Dr. Hai-Wan Choi had identified their target through careful analysis of swarm communication patterns. Deep in swarm-controlled space, 3 weeks of travel from the rim was a massive nexus node. This biological computing structure processed and distributed learned behaviors across hundreds of light years. Destroying it would not kill the swarm, but it would disrupt coordination and buy precious time. The journey into swarm space was a descent into nightmare. In the outer layers, Commander Li's reconnaissance flights discovered what had happened to conquered systems. She flew over a world that had once been home to a species called the Melodians. The Council had studied their ruins for centuries, admiring their architecture and art. Now their cities served as biological factories, their monuments repurposed as structural elements in vast swarm constructs. Li recorded everything, knowing that someone needed to document what the swarm did to civilizations it consumed. The recordings were difficult to watch. This was not just death, it was transformation. The complete erasure of everything a species had been converted into raw materials for something that did not even understand what it had destroyed. Deeper into swarm territory, the laws of physics seemed negotiable. The swarm had learned to manipulate quantum fields on a massive scale, creating zones where causality broke down. Ships experienced events in the wrong order. Weapons fired before triggers were pulled. Shields activated after impacts. Time itself became unreliable. Human crews adapted better than AI systems to these conditions. Trained in intuition and improvisation, they learned to trust their instincts when sensors gave contradictory readings. But the psychological cost was severe. Many crew members suffered trauma from experiencing time non-linearly, watching their own actions from the outside before performing them. Dr. Choi made a heartbreaking discovery in these deeper zones. She found evidence of other species that had fought the swarm perhaps thousands of years ago. Ancient debris fields, weapon signatures from technologies humans did not recognize, and most painfully distressed beacons still transmitting in languages that no longer had anyone alive to understand them. Every species that had reached this deep into swarm space had been consumed. None had escaped. The strike force was walking the same path that had led countless others to extinction. Choi shared this information with Captain Park, who made sure every crew member knew what they were facing. They deserved to know the odds. In a damaged system they designated Ghost Station Alpha, the strike force encountered something unexpected. Survivors. A small group of ship-based refugees from various species had been living in swarm territory for decades, staying mobile and insignificant enough to avoid being harvested. They were led by someone who introduced herself as Keeper Subin. She was human, incredibly old, and claimed to have been part of the original Horizon expedition 3 centuries ago. She had survived by learning to think like the swarm, moving slowly, communicating rarely, becoming part of the background noise of space. Subin revealed shocking truths. The Horizon had not accidentally discovered the swarm. They had been investigating ancient warnings left by previous galactic civilizations, species that had fought and lost against this same threat. The swarm was older than anyone suspected. It might have been the dominant form of existence in the universe for billions of years. Organic civilizations were brief anomalies, temporary patterns that eventually got absorbed back into the swarm's endless cycle. More importantly, Subin had spent 300 years studying the Nexus nodes. She knew their weaknesses. They were not indestructible, but destroying one required getting past defenses that had never been breached. No species had ever gotten close enough to seriously damage a Nexus, because the swarm protected them absolutely. Using Subin's intelligence, the strike force planned its final approach. The Nexus sat at the heart of a system the swarm had fortified beyond anything they had encountered. Hundreds of predator constructs patrolled in overlapping patterns. The space around the Nexus was filled with autonomous defensive systems. The Nexus itself radiated energy that could blind sensors or drive AI systems insane. Captain Park proposed what everyone knew was a suicide plan. The Soul's thunder would charge directly at the Nexus, drawing all defensive fire. The massive dreadnought would serve as bait, while the smaller destroyers and fighters slipped through the chaos to deliver their payloads. It was the only way that might work, but it meant certain death for the Thunder's crew. Admiral Kim insisted on commanding the Thunder personally. It was her right as fleet commander to lead the most dangerous mission, but Captain Park refused to allow it. In a tense confrontation that technically qualified as mutiny, Park relieved Kim of tactical command, citing emergency protocols that allowed field commanders to override admirals in specific combat situations. Kim knew he was right. The fleet needed her alive to continue the war. If this mission failed, someone had to survive to try again. She transferred her flag to Park's destroyer, giving him full tactical authority. Then she watched as volunteers stepped forward to crew the Thunder for its final mission. The assault began with the Thunder's charge. The massive dreadnought accelerated toward the Nexus at full speed, all weapons firing. Swarm defenses concentrated on the obvious threat, pouring firepower that would have vaporized entire planets. The Thunder shields failed within 3 minutes. Her armor began to sublimate under the sustained bombardment, but she kept coming, held together by redundant systems and the sheer stubbornness of human engineering. Commander Lee led her fighters through the gap the Thunder created. They flew through storms of debris and energy fire, their small size making them difficult targets. Each fighter carried nuclear payloads, weapons that were obsolete by Council standards, but devastating in concentrated use. One by one, fighters were destroyed, but each loss meant another payload delivered closer to the Nexus. Lee's cockpit was filled with alarms and warnings. Her shields were failing, her engines overheating, but she pushed forward. She watched her pilots die around her, friends she had trained with for years. Each death hurt, but she could not stop. This was what they had come here to do. Captain Park took the indomitable spirit on an impossible course, threading through spaces between swarm constructs that were too small for a destroyer. His crew navigated by instinct, cutting so close to enemy vessels that they exchanged fire at point-blank range. The destroyer's armor was scarred and pitted, but she held together. Human ships were built to take punishment. The Soul's thunder reached the Nexus's outer defenses with her hull glowing red from heat. Her crew knew they would not survive the next few minutes. The ship's commander, the executive officer who had volunteered for this duty, opened a final communication to the fleet. "This is Thunder. We have reached firing position. It has been an honor. Humanity forever." Then she detonated the ship's remaining reactors in a controlled explosion. The blast tore through the Nexus's defenses just as Park's destroyer and Lee's surviving fighters released their nuclear payloads. The combined explosions created a cascade reaction that destroyed the Nexus's core structure, disrupting coordination across a 100 light-years of swarm space. The strike force retreated through chaos. Swarm forces, suddenly uncoordinated and confused, attacked each other in their disorganization. 6 of the 12 ships that began the deep strike survived to reach friendly space. The Soul's thunder was gone with all 317 crew members who chose to die so the mission could succeed. Dr. Haewon Choi, who had observed everything from the Indomitable Spirit's bridge, transmitted her full report to the Council and to Earth. Her final words captured what the mission meant. "We have proven that the swarm can bleed. We have shown that victory is possible, but only through sacrifice that the galaxy thought it had evolved beyond. The question now is whether the galaxy can bear the cost of fighting or whether humanity must stand alone against the darkness." As the surviving ships limped home, Admiral Kim received a transmission from the Council. 50 member species had voted to begin military rearmament. They had seen what humanity accomplished and understood what it cost. The galaxy was finally waking up, but Kim knew this was just the beginning. They had destroyed one Nexus out of dozens. They had bought time, nothing more. The real war was still ahead, and it would require the entire galaxy to fight together if they hoped to survive. The Deathworld's children had shown the way. Now others would have to follow, learning to be war. Captain Dewan Park stood at the observation window of the Neptune orbital shipyard, watching the old warships float like ghosts in the darkness. These massive vessels had once been the pride of Earth's military forces. Now they were just metal shells waiting to be broken apart and recycled. Daewon had been doing this job for 15 years, and he hated every moment of it. He was 45 years old now, with gray streaks in his black hair and tired eyes that had seen too much combat. That was before the peace, before humanity joined the Galactic Council and agreed to put away their weapons. The galaxy had convinced Earth that war was primitive. That civilized species solved problems with words instead of guns. So humanity had dismantled their fleets and sent warriors like Taiwan to quiet jobs where they could be forgotten. On the other side of the solar system, Dr. Huan Choi sat in her small office aboard the Council diplomatic station. She was 32, young enough to have grown up in the peaceful era. She had never known war, never seen Earth before integration. To her, the Council was everything wonderful about civilization. Different species working together, sharing knowledge, solving problems through understanding instead of violence. She was studying alien languages when the message came through. At first, she thought it was a mistake. The encryption was old, really old. It used codes that humanity had stopped using 200 years ago, military codes. Her hands shook slightly as she worked to decode it. The message was short and terrible. It came from a ship called Horizon, one of Earth's first exploration vessels that had disappeared 3 centuries ago. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed, but here was its beacon repeating the same words over and over. "We found something. They are coming. Earth is not safe. Wake the fleet." Haiwan immediately brought the message to her superiors in the council. She expected them to be alarmed to organize search parties or defensive preparations. Instead, they dismissed it. They said it was probably just an old signal bouncing around space. Nothing to worry about. But Huan noticed something strange. Some of the council members didn't just seem unconcerned. They seemed nervous, like they were hiding something. She decided to investigate on her own. Using her security clearance, she searched through classified databases. What she found made her blood run cold. The Horizon had sent data back before it disappeared. The Council had received it and locked it away at the highest level of secrecy. Haiwan knew she needed help from someone who could access military records. She thought of Captain Dewan Park. They met quietly in a small restaurant on Mars, far from any Council observers. Dewan listened as Huan explained everything. He had heard stories about the Horizon, legends told by old veterans. Now, here was proof it might be real. Together, they broke into the classified military archives. What they found was worse than either had imagined. The Horizon had discovered something at the edge of the galaxy, something the crew called the Swarm. It was not a civilization or an empire. It was something more like a force of nature, spreading across galaxies and consuming everything in its path. The Swarm did not negotiate or communicate. It simply arrived, broke down entire solar systems into raw materials, and moved on. The Horizon had found one of its relay stations at the galactic edge. By activating it accidentally, they had sent a signal into deep space. They had rung a dinner bell for something that ate galaxies. The files revealed even more. The Council had known about the Swarm for decades. Their whole philosophy of peace was not about being civilized. It was about hiding. They thought if they eliminated all warfare, if they made the galaxy quiet and peaceful, maybe the Swarm would not notice them. They had been holding their breath for years, hoping the monster would pass them by. Haiwan felt her entire worldview shatter. Everything she believed about the Council, about peaceful coexistence, had been built on a lie. They were not evolved beyond war. They were just terrified. Daewon pulled up recent sensor data from the galactic rim. His face went pale. Star systems were going dark, disappearing from all sensors as if they had never existed. The Swarm was here. It was moving toward the core of the galaxy, toward Earth and all the Council worlds. He made a decision that would change everything. He sent a coded message to Admiral Jiwon Kim, the legendary commander who had led Earth's forces during the integration wars. She was 67 now, living in retirement on Mars. But Daewon knew she would understand. The message was simple. "Admiral, the old enemy has arrived, requesting permission to reactivate the Neptune fleet." Then Daewon did something that was technically illegal. He accessed the old military networks and transmitted activation codes to the decommissioned warships. These codes should have been deleted decades ago, but someone had kept them alive. Someone had been waiting for this moment. All across the Neptune shipyard, ancient warships began to wake up. Their power cores hummed to life. Their weapon systems ran diagnostic checks. Their AI computers booted up after centuries of sleep. The ships were old, but they had been built by humans who knew how to make things that lasted. They had been built for war. Daewon received a response from Admiral Kim. It was just 2 words: permission granted. As the fleet powered up, Daewon learned something that amazed him. He was not alone. There was a secret group called the Keepers, led by a young officer named Commander Taeyong Lee. For decades, they had been maintaining these old warships in secret, keeping them ready for combat. They had known this day might come. They had prepared for it. The Keepers had kept every system functional. They had updated the weapons, maintained the armor, and trained in secret on the old combat simulators. While the rest of humanity learned to be peaceful, they remembered how to fight. Among the ships coming online was the Soul's Thunder, a massive dreadnought that had been the flagship of Earth's defense forces. It was ugly compared to Council ships, with thick armor plates and redundant systems everywhere. But it had been built on Earth by people who knew that space was dangerous, and enemies were real. Wan watched all of this with mixed feelings. Part of her was horrified at the thought of war returning, but another part, a part she did not know existed, felt something like relief. The galaxy was pretending to be safe, but it never had been. At least now they were facing the truth. Daewon stood on the bridge of his old ship, a destroyer called Indomitable Spirit. He had not commanded a warship in 20 years, but his hands remembered where every control was. His crew was assembled, mostly veterans who had come out of retirement. They were older now, but they remembered their training. They remembered what it meant to be warriors. He opened a fleet-wide channel and spoke to all the ships coming online. His voice was steady and calm. "This is Captain Daewon Park to all vessels. We are the children of Earth, born on a world where everything wanted to kill us. We learned to fight because we had no choice. The galaxy made us put away our weapons and told us we did not need them anymore. They were wrong. Today we show them what humans do when someone threatens our home. Today we wake the fleet across human space." More ships came online. Old crews returned. Warriors who had been working quiet jobs remembered who they were. The Deathworld's children were waking up, and they were angry. The galaxy was about to remember something it had tried to forget. Humans were dangerous, not because they wanted to be, but because they came from a world that had taught them how to survive against impossible odds. And now that survival instinct was focused on a new threat. The swarm was coming, but humanity was ready to meet it. The swarm's predator constructs were unlike anything humanity had prepared for. They were not ships in any conventional sense. They were vast biological mechanical entities that blurred the line between living creature and machine. Each one was unique, evolved from the tactical patterns of species the swarm had consumed millions of years ago. Captain Daewon Park watched as one predator phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind his destroyer formation and disappearing before his weapons could lock on. Another generated a gravity well so intense it crushed a destroyer like a tin can. A third released millions of smaller units that swarmed over the heavy cruiser Valiant Dawn, burrowing into its hull like metallic insects, eating away at its armor. In the first hour of combat, the fleet lost 3 destroyers completely and had 5 more damaged badly enough that they had to withdraw. Admiral Ji-won Kim realized they were facing an enemy that adapted faster than any organic military force could. The Predators learned from each engagement and shared that knowledge instantly across their network. Every tactic humanity used became less effective within minutes. During an emergency command conference held over secure channels, Captain Park proposed something radical. "We are trying to fight them like they are a conventional enemy." He said, "We are using optimized tactics, coordinated strategies, all the things that military theory says we should do. But that makes us predictable. The swarm's learning algorithms can counter predictable behavior." "What are you suggesting?" Admiral Kim asked. "Stop being optimal," Park said. Humans did not evolve to be optimal. We evolved to survive on a planet that tried to kill us every day. We learned to be unpredictable, aggressive, and irrational when necessary. We should lean into that. Make decisions too quickly for the swarm to analyze. Use tactics that look like mistakes. Be chaotic. Commander Taiyang Li understood immediately. Fly drunk, she said. Everyone looked at her. Not literally, she clarified, but pilots under stress make irregular movements, random decisions. AI systems struggle to predict truly random behavior. If we stop trying to fly perfectly and start flying like panicked humans, we become harder to target. Admiral Kim considered the proposal. It went against everything military doctrine taught, but military doctrine was written for fighting other organized militaries, not an enemy that learned from every engagement. She made her decision. All ships new combat orders. Abandon standard formations. Operate independently. Use your judgment. Make it messy. Make it human. The new doctrine was put to the test in a system the humans called the Broken Stars, where 3 red dwarf stars orbited each other in chaotic patterns. The swarm had concentrated forces there to harvest unusual isotope deposits. Admiral Kim decided this was where they would make their stand. The battle began with what looked like confusion. Human ships broke formation and scattered. Some appeared to retreat. Others charged directly at superior forces. There was no pattern, no visible strategy. To an outside observer, it looked like panic, but it was controlled chaos, and the swarm's predators could not predict what humans would do next. Captain Park led his destroyer group on what appeared to be a panicked retreat, drawing swarm predators into the chaotic gravity fields between the 3 stars. At the last possible moment, his ships fired their engines at full burn and escaped. The pursuing predators, unable to adjust quickly enough, were torn apart by tidal forces that would have destroyed Council ships, but only damaged the heavily built human vessels. Commander Li led her fighter wings on an insane course, flying so close to the stars' coronas that their shields glowed red from the heat. They used the stellar radiation to mask their approach, making themselves invisible to swarm sensors until the last moment. When they struck, their weapons were superheated beyond safe operating parameters, causing massive damage, but also destroying many fighters in the process. 40% of Li's wing did not return from that attack run. She watched fighters explode or simply disappear into the stellar fire, their pilots choosing certain death to complete their missions. She felt each loss like a physical wound, but she did not order a retreat. This was war, and war demanded sacrifice. At the center of the battle, the Dreadnought Soul's Thunder held the line under Admiral Kim's direct command. When swarm forces concentrated on breaking through, Kim ordered something that would be studied in military memes for centuries. She called it a Nova Strike, deliberately overloading the ship's main reactors to create a focused explosion equivalent to a small supernova. The engineering crew protested that such an action would destroy the ship. Kim's response was simple: then make sure the backup systems can handle life support. We are doing this. The blast vaporized dozens of swarm constructs and crippled scores more. The Soul's Thunder survived barely. Her primary systems were melted slag, her main reactors destroyed, but her backup systems kept the crew alive. The ship was dead in space, but she had bought time for the rest of the fleet. The Battle of the Broken Stars ended after 18 hours of continuous combat. The swarm withdrew, having lost more constructs in a single engagement than in the previous century. But the human cost was devastating. 12 ships destroyed completely, 18 more damaged beyond immediate repair, and nearly 4,000 dead. The Soul's Thunder required 6 months of repairs and would never be the same ship again. Dr. Hewan Choi documented everything from the Bridge of the Dauntless. She watched crew members execute suicide runs with calm professionalism. She saw pilots choose certain death to complete missions. She witnessed commanders ordering strikes they knew would kill their own people. This was the reality of warfare that the peaceful galaxy had tried to forget. Her reports back to the Council were grim but honest. She described the battles in detail, not hiding the brutality or the cost. The galaxy needed to see what warfare actually looked like, not the sanitized version they imagined. News of the victory spread across Council space. Reactions were mixed. Some species were inspired, seeing hope in humanity's resistance. Others were horrified by the brutality of human combat doctrine. Many questioned whether survival was worth such a terrible price, but the Council could not ignore the results. For the first time in recorded history, someone had fought the swarm and won, not just survived, but actually defeated it in open combat. The Council began quietly sharing intelligence on swarm patterns and resource allocations. It was not official support, but it was something. More significantly, volunteers began arriving from other species. Not many, because the Council's pacifist philosophy ran deep in most civilizations, but there were always a few. Scientists who wanted to study the swarm, engineers who wanted to help repair damaged ships, and a handful of combat specialists from species that remembered their own violent pasts. They joined human ships as observers and advisors. Some even became crew members, willing to learn humanity's way of war. It was the beginning of something that would grow larger in the months to come. But victory had consequences that nobody anticipated. Captured swarm data cores analyzed by Dr. Choi revealed that the Battle of the Broken Stars had been fully integrated into the swarm's collective knowledge. New construct designs were being generated specifically to counter human tactics. The swarm was learning to be chaotic, to be unpredictable, to fight like humans. Worse, the swarm was accelerating its advance, having identified humanity as a genuine threat. It was redirecting resources from harvesting operations to military production. The fleet's intelligence estimates suggested they had 3 months before the swarm could deploy forces that would overwhelm humanity's defenses through sheer numbers. Admiral Kim called another emergency command conference. The damaged Soul's Thunder was being towed back to a repair facility, but Kim had transferred her flag to the heavy cruiser Dauntless. She looked tired but determined as she addressed her officers. "We have proven we can fight and win," she said, "but we cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy that outnumbers us millions to one. We need a new strategy. We cannot keep fighting the swarm's forward elements. We need to strike at its heart." Commander Lee spoke up. "Strike at its heart. Admiral, we barely survived fighting its peripheral forces. How do we attack its core?" Captain Park answered. "We stop playing defense. We take a strike force deep into swarm space and find where it coordinates operations." Dr. Choi's analysis suggests there are nexus nodes that process and distribute learned behaviors. If we can destroy even one, we might disrupt the swarm's ability to adapt. "That would be a suicide mission," someone said. "Yes." Admiral Kim said simply it would be, but it might also save the galaxy. "We need volunteers willing to go deeper into swarm space than anyone has ever gone. We need people willing to die if that is what it takes." Every officer in the conference volunteered. Admiral Kim was not surprised. These were the children of Earth, warriors who had chosen to stand and fight when running seemed easier. If the mission required sacrifice, they would make that sacrifice. The plan was set. A strike force would penetrate deep into swarm territory to attack a nexus node. The rest of the fleet would remain at the rim, conducting diversionary attacks to draw swarm attention. It was desperate, dangerous, and likely to fail.